My name is Jacob Blake. I'm 30 years old and live by myself in an old house in Sacramento, California, the city where I was born and grew up. My life is far from glamorous. I work as an insurance agent, spending my days behind a keyboard crunching numbers for policies nobody really pays attention to. But if you were to ask me about my family, about the past few years, I'd tell you a story I never thought I'd have to experience. It all started with subtle disagreements, small fissures appearing in what I once considered my family's safe haven. I'm the oldest kid in my middle-class family. My parents are Martin and Janet Blake. My dad, a tall man with a powerful voice, always boasted about his network. He loved wearing fancy suits, even though I often wondered if he could truly afford them. My mom, Janet, enjoyed throwing extravagant parties, collecting designer handbags and staging photo shoots for social media to display her perfect life to her friends. Then there's my younger brother, Luke, 5 years my junior, who seemed to inherit all our parents' flashiness. He constantly had new cars, the newest smartphones, and a self-assured grin, as if the world was his for the taking. And me? I was different. I've always leaned toward simplicity. An old t-shirt, worn-out sneakers, and a cup of black coffee in the morning are enough to make me happy. I never understood why people would spend hundreds on a meal just for a photo, or buy a new expensive car when the old one still runs perfectly. Perhaps that's why, in my family's eyes, I was always the outsider. They never outright said it. But their looks, their teasing comments, and their overall demeanor made it clear. I can still clearly recall our family get-togethers in the large living room of our old home. These were events like birthdays, Thanksgiving, or just random weekend nights when my parents wanted to impress the neighbors. The dining table would be piled high with tasty food, wine glasses glistening, and laughter echoing through the room. Yet, even though I was physically there, I always felt like an outsider. My dad would drone on about the huge deals he was about to finalize, though I knew most of it was overblown. My mom would boast about her new jewelry or an upcoming trip. Luke would eagerly share tales of his rich friends and late-night parties downtown. And me? I'd sit silently, picking at a piece of cold cut, trying not to knock over my water when someone bumped my chair. "Jacob, why are you always so quiet?" Luke once asked, his voice half joking, but his eyes mocking. "Or are you busy calculating how much you've saved by not buying expensive wine?" The entire table erupted in laughter. My mom gave me a faint smile but said nothing. My dad patted Luke on the back as if his comment was a victory. I forced an awkward smile, trying to ignore the sting in my chest. I wasn't mad at them, at least not then. I just thought maybe I didn't fit into their lifestyle. Maybe I was just too different. But that difference wasn't limited to their sarcastic comments. It seeped into every aspect of our family dynamic. When I graduated college with a finance degree, I chose a job at a small, steady insurance company with a respectable income. Meanwhile, Luke dropped out of college to pursue his dreams, which really meant starting a business with money he borrowed from our parents. His company crashed in less than a year, but our parents didn't fault him. Instead, they'd look at me, sigh, and say, "Jacob, if only you had your brother's ambition. Ambitious." I didn't get it. I showed up to work on time, paid my bills without delay, and never caused my parents financial worry. Yet, to them, I was still a disappointment because I didn't live the way they envisioned. No luxury car, no grand house, no wild parties, just ordinary Jacob, living in a small apartment, diligently saving for a modest home someday. The old family house I live in now holds all my memories. It's not huge or modern, but it feels cozy. The wooden walls have faded over time, the floorboards creak with every step, and the small backyard is overgrown with weeds because I don't have the time to care for it. But I genuinely love this place. It's where I spent my childhood. It's where I used to sit with my grandfather listening to his tales of youth, of the days he toiled in a lumber mill with his rough, calloused hands. He was the only one in the family who never viewed me as an oddball. "Jacob," he'd say in his gentle, steady voice, "you don't need to be like anyone else. Be true to yourself. That's what truly counts. Flashiness is just superficial. But integrity is everything." I still recall those mornings sitting with my grandfather on the old wooden porch bench. The aroma of pine from the backyard blended with the scent of the coffee he brewed daily. He never bought expensive coffee. just the inexpensive kind from the grocery store. But he'd always say, "Jacob, what's real is what tastes good," my grandfather. William Blake was the most unassuming man I've ever known. He didn't have flashy suits like my dad, boastful stories like my mom, or Luke's arrogant self-assurance, but he possessed something I'd always craved: inner peace. He was the only one in the family who genuinely understood me. Oh, my parents. And Luke would poke fun at my thriftiness, my old t-shirts, or my absence from their fancy parties. My grandfather always looked at me with kind eyes. "Jacob," he'd say, gently patting my shoulder, "you don't need to pursue what others have. Just live authentically, and everything will work out." I didn't fully grasp his meaning then, but each time he said it, I felt a boost of confidence, as if he was sharing a profound secret I wasn't quite ready for. He'd often tell me stories about his younger days, building things with his rough hands in a lumber mill. "Money doesn't define a man, Jacob," he'd murmur in a quiet, steady voice, "but it can ruin those who don't understand its true worth." I didn't fully comprehend his words, but I'd nod attentively, committing each one to memory. Once he looked at me, his eyes shining oddly, and said, "Someday you'll have something truly your own. Don't be afraid of being left behind. You're stronger than you realize." I smiled, thinking he was just being encouraging. How could I have known those words weren't just comforting? They were a promise. He passed away 5 years ago on a fall afternoon. I can still picture that day clearly. The sky was gray with a light rain falling on the old house's eaves. I sat by his bed, holding his fragile hand, trying to hold back tears as he whispered, "Jacob, stay true to yourself. Don't let anyone take that from you." Those were his last words to me. Then he was gone, leaving a hole in my heart that even now I haven't been able to fill. After his death, everything in my family shifted. Just a few months later, my parents and Luke suddenly became inexplicably rich. They left Sacramento, abandoning the old house where I grew up, and moved to a lavish mansion in Miami. Their social media feeds were overflowing with pictures of extravagant parties, trips to Paris, Dubai, or islands I'd only ever seen on television. My mom flaunted designer handbags. My dad boasted about meetings with influential people. Luke showed up with a flashy red sports car, his confident smirk hinting he'd struck it rich. I was never invited to Miami, not even once. My mom called, her voice soft but detached. "Jacob, you prefer a simple life, so staying in Sacramento suits you. The old house is yours. Your dad and I decided." I didn't complain. The old house was my sanctuary, where my memories of my grandfather resided. I was thankful that, at the very least, I didn't have to worry about rent. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder, how did they get rich so fast? My dad claimed it was business luck, but he never gave any specifics. When I asked Luke, he just guffawed and said, "You don't need to know, Jacob. Just keep living your boring life." I wasn't jealous of their fortune. Honestly, I was just heartbroken that they seemed to have forgotten about me. Our calls became less frequent, messages went unanswered. I continued my routine, going to work daily, eating modest meals in the old kitchen, and sitting by the window, staring at the overgrown garden. But every time I saw their social media photos, those beaming smiles, those lavish parties, I felt a quiet pang of sadness. They were my family, but I was no longer part of their world. I began to question the source of the money. Where did it originate? My grandfather wasn't wealthy, not to my knowledge. He lived modestly, never bragging. But his words, "You'll have something of your own," kept echoing in my mind like an unsolved riddle. I tried to dismiss it, thinking I was overthinking things. But every time I looked at my grandfather's photo on the wall, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being concealed. Thanksgiving and Christmas used to be the holidays I anticipated the most. There were times when the whole family would get together, even if I sometimes felt out of place amidst my parents and Luke's endless bragging. But at least back then, I was still included. After they moved to Miami, everything shifted. Those holidays became the most isolating days of the year for me. Every year I'd call, inviting my parents and Luke back to Sacramento for dinner, hoping we could reconnect like old times. "Mom, are you coming back for Christmas dinner this year?" I'd ask, trying to sound cheerful. "Oh, Jacob, I'm just so busy," she'd reply, her voice gentle but distant. Your father has a big party in Miami. Next time, okay? That next time never materialized. Luke didn't even bother to respond. Once I texted him to ask if he'd come for Thanksgiving, and all I got was a cold scene notification. I was never invited to Miami. Not once. I only learned about their lives through the pictures they posted on social media. Last Christmas, I sat alone in the old house with a small plate of turkey and a glass of cheap wine. Meanwhile, on my phone screen, I saw my parents and Luke grinning in an upscale restaurant with sparkling lights and a table laden with fancy food. They didn't mention me, no text, no call. I wondered, did they even remember I was here, alone in the house? They once called home? The loneliness wasn't sudden. It built up gradually, like water seeping through the old house's roof, slowly decaying everything. I tried not to dwell on it. I told myself they were just busy, that their new life was simply too different. But every time I saw their photos there, smiles, their embraces, the happy moments I wasn't a part of, my heart felt like it was being squeezed. I didn't want to admit it, but I was profoundly hurt. I began to wonder if I'd done something wrong. Was it because I was too different, too understated, that they didn't want me in their flashy world? Was I simply not good enough to be by their side? Those questions swirled in my head, especially on cold Christmas nights as I sat alone by the old fireplace, listening to the wind howl through the windows. I tried to stay connected. I sent Christmas gifts, small things like a knitted scarf for Mom, a book for Dad, a leather wallet for Luke. But no one ever thanked me. No one even acknowledged them. I wondered if they even opened the gifts, or if they were simply discarded in some corner of their opulent mansion. More and more, I felt like a faint shadow in the family. I still cared about them, still thought of them, but I no longer knew how to bridge the gap. I just kept living quietly, hoping they might remember me someday. But deep down, I knew that day might never arrive. This Christmas, the year I turned 30, was much like the previous ones. I prepared a simple meal in the old Sacramento house. A plate of turkey, some mashed potatoes, and a bottle of inexpensive wine from the grocery store. A week prior, I'd called my mom, inviting her and my dad to dinner. "I'll think about it, Jacob," she'd said, her voice soft but non-committal. Luke, as usual, didn't reply to my text. I wasn't surprised, but the sting remained. The old house was eerily quiet. I played some Christmas songs on the ancient speaker, trying to conjure a festive mood. The small Christmas tree in the living room corner twinkled with colored lights, but it only amplified my loneliness. I sat at the dining table, staring at the 3 empty chairs. I pictured the family gathered like in the old days when my grandfather was alive, when my mom's smile was bright and my dad spun exaggerated tales about his job. But now, it was just me, alone with fading memories. I picked up my phone and scrolled through social media. As expected, my mom had posted a new photo. She and my dad stood before a massive Christmas tree in their Miami mansion, surrounded by meticulously wrapped gifts and unfamiliar faces. Luke was there too, his arm around a stranger, his smile as triumphant as if he owned the world. I stared at the photo, searching for any indication they remembered me. There was none. No caption, no message. I turned off my phone, a bitter knot forming in my throat. I stood and walked out to the porch where my grandfather and I used to sit for hours. The freezing December wind cut through me, making me shiver. I looked up at the star-filled sky, trying to recall his voice. "You'll have something of your own," he'd said. Those words now echoed in my mind, a reminder that I wasn't entirely by myself. My grandfather had always believed in me, even when I doubted myself. Just then, the doorbell chimed. I flinched, almost dropping the wine glass in my hand. Who would be here at this hour? It was nearly 9 p.m., and I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door, my heart quickening slightly. Through the small glass panel, I saw a man in a postal worker's uniform holding a light yellow envelope. I opened the door, forcing a strained smile. "Jacob Blake?" the postal worker asked, his voice monotone. "Yes, that's me," I replied, looking at the envelope with curiosity. "This is for you. Please sign here." He handed me a pen and a form. I signed quickly, took the envelope, and thanked him before he turned and vanished into the cold night. I closed the door, standing motionless in the hallway, the envelope in my hand. It wasn't heavy, but there was something important about it. On the envelope, the familiar handwriting made my heart skip a beat. It was my grandfather's. I recognized it instantly. Slanted, slightly shaky but precise script on the front read, "To Jacob Blake, to be opened on the Christmas of your 30th year." My breath hitched. My grandfather had died 5 years ago. How could there be a letter from him? Delivered today of all days? I sank onto the sofa, my hands shaking as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in half. As I unfolded it, my grandfather's voice seemed to resonate in my ears. "Dear Jacob," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means you're 30 years old, and I hope you're still the same honest man I've always been proud of. I know life can be challenging, and family doesn't always turn out how you expect. But I want you to know you're never truly alone. I've left something for you, a trust fund enough for you to build the life you want on your own terms. Go to my lawyer, James Carter, at 245 Main Street in Sacramento. He'll help you claim it. This is rightfully yours, Jacob. Don't let anyone take it from you. I love you always, Grandpa." I reread the letter countless times, my heart pounding. A trust fund. He'd never mentioned anything like it. He lived so modestly, never flaunting money. I always assumed he only had the small house and a modest savings, but a trust fund. Could this explain why my parents and Luke suddenly became rich after his death? The idea flashed through my mind, sending shivers down my spine. I stood up, pacing the living room, the letter still tightly held in my hand. Memories of my grandfather flooded back. The afternoons he taught me to carve wood, times he laughed heartily when I told him about my mundane days at the insurance company. He always said I had inherent worth, that I didn't need to be like anyone else. But if he'd truly left me a trust fund, why was I unaware of it? And why did my family change so dramatically after he passed? I looked at my grandfather's photo on the wall. His eyes seemed to bore into me, urging me to take action. I knew what I had to do. Tomorrow, I would go to James Carter's office. I needed answers. I needed the truth. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The letter sat on the bedside table like a small, quiet flame in my heart. I thought about the years my family had left me behind. The solitary Christmases, the social media photos where I was conspicuously absent. Did they know about this trust fund? Had they intentionally hidden it from me? The thought was both agonizing and infuriating. But I tried to remain composed. I needed evidence. I needed to confront the lawyer. The next morning I woke up early, put on a plain button-up shirt, and drove to the lawyer's office on Main Street. My mind was a whirl of hope and dread. I had no idea what I'd uncover, but I couldn't continue living in the dark. When I entered the office, a receptionist smiled and asked if I had an appointment. "I'm here to see Mr. James Carter," I said, my voice slightly wavering. "I'm Jacob Blake." She nodded and led me to a small room where a middle-aged man with graying hair sat behind a desk. He stood, shook my hand, and invited me to sit. "I'm Jacob Blake," I stated, pulling my grandfather's letter from my pocket. "My grandfather, William Blake, told me to come here. He mentioned a trust fund." James Carter looked at me, his eyes cold and devoid of emotion. He took the letter, scanned it, and placed it on the desk. "I'm afraid there's no trust fund in your name, Jacob," he said, his voice flat. "I don't know who your grandfather is. I certainly don't have any records of this." I felt the floor drop out from under me. "That's impossible," I whispered, my voice cracking. "This is my grandfather's letter. He clearly said to come here to see you about a trust fund." Carter shrugged, offering a faint smile. "Maybe you're mistaken, or perhaps it's a prank." "Can't help you." I left the office, my head spinning. The letter was still clenched in my hand, but Carter's words pierced my heart like a knife. I almost believed I'd imagined it all. But as I got into my car and looked at my grandfather's photo on my phone, a realization hit me. My family's sudden wealth, the extravagant trips, the Miami mansionette, all began right after my grandfather's death. I knew something was wrong, and I was determined to uncover the truth. no matter what it took. I drove home, my grandfather's letter still on the passenger seat, a constant reminder not to give up. James Carter's words echoed in my mind. "There's no trust fund in your name, Jacob." His tone was cold, unwavering, but there was a fleeting evasiveness in his eyes that made me distrust him. I knew my grandfather. He never lied, never made empty promises. If he wrote in that letter that a trust fund existed for me, it had to be true. But if it did, why did Carter deny it? And why did my family become wealthy right after his death? The old house welcomed me with its familiar quiet. I sat on the sofa, rereading the letter, each word etching itself into my heart. "This is rightfully yours, Jacob. Don't let anyone take it from you." I looked at my grandfather's photo on the wall. His eyes seemed to follow me, urging me onward. I couldn't stop here. I needed answers, no matter how painful. But I didn't know where to begin. I was just an ordinary insurance agent, unaccustomed to investigating or confronting people like James Carter. I felt small, helpless, like facing an unscalable wall. But then I remembered my grandfather, the man who taught me that integrity is paramount. If he believed in me enough to leave a legacy, I had to believe in myself. I picked up my phone and searched for James Carter. His law office looked professional online, with a sleek website featuring photos of him in an expensive suit in front of a bookshelf filled with files. But it didn't ease my mind. If my grandfather had chosen Carter to manage the trust, why did Carter deny knowing him? Was he hiding something? The thought made my heart race. I needed to dig deeper, but I couldn't rely solely on intuition. I decided to start with what was closest, my family. Their sudden wealth troubled me. I didn't want to believe they were involved, but I couldn't dismiss the idea. I opened my laptop and scrolled through their social media. Extravagant trips, the Miami mansion, expensive possessions. I searched for a clue, anything to explain their rapid transformation. But beyond the flashy photos, I found nothing but an unsettling emptiness. Then, an idea struck me. If the trust fund existed, there had to be records of bank account, a contract, some kind of paper trail. I wasn't a financial expert, but my insurance job had taught me how to analyze numbers and spot inconsistencies. I decided to start there. The next day, I called in sick to work and drove to the bank my grandfather used to frequent, a small branch in Sacramento. Wasn't sure what I'd find, but I brought his letter, hoping it would open a door. The bank was almost empty, with only one middle-aged teller behind the counter. I approached, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hi," I said, offering an awkward smile. "I'd like to ask about my grandfather's account, William Blake. He passed away 5 years ago. But I think he might have left something a trust fund, perhaps." The teller, Sarah, according to her name tag, looked at me curiously. "Do you have any documents related to your grandfather? A death certificate? Or any records?" I handed her the letter. "This is all I have. He told me to go to a lawyer, but the lawyer said there's no trust fund. I just want to check if that's true." Sarah read the letter, her brow furrowing. "I'm not sure how much I can help, Jacob. Old records are usually archived, and I'd need legal authorization. Do you have power of attorney?" I shook my head, disappointment rising. "No, just this letter. But I know my grandfather didn't lie. If you could check even a little, I'd be so grateful." Sarah sighed, but her expression softened. "All right, I'll look through the system, but I can't promise anything. Wait here." I sat in the waiting area, my hands tightly clasped. Each minute felt like an hour. I imagined every scenario, Sarah returning to say there was nothing, that I was chasing a fantasy, that I'd have to accept my family had truly abandoned me. But then Sarah came back holding a thin file. "This isn't detailed," she said cautiously, "but I found an old transaction linked to William Blake. There was a trust fund set up in 2017 in your name, Jacob Blake." But single quotes, she paused as if weighing whether to continue. "But what?" I asked, my heart pounding. "The fund was completely withdrawn shortly after your grandfather's death. The money was transferred to another account under the name Martin Blake. My blood ran cold. "How much?" I whispered. Sarah shook her head. "I don't have an exact figure, but it was substantial, very substantial." You'd need to see a lawyer to sort this out because I can't access more. I left the bank, my mind spinning. My father, Luke, the Miami mansion, the extravagant trips, the pieces were clicking into place, but the picture was heartbreaking. I didn't want to believe my family could do this, steal what was rightfully mine, what my grandfather had spent his life protecting for me. But the evidence was undeniable. I resolved to dig deeper. I contacted a retired banker, Henry, who had worked with my grandfather. After a few phone calls and a meeting at a coffee shop, Henry confirmed Sarah's findings. "I remember that trust fund," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "William was very careful. He wanted to ensure it was solely for you. But after he passed, someone came with a power of attorney claiming to represent you. I didn't handle it personally, but I heard the money was transferred. I think a lawyer was involved. Carter, wasn't it?" James Carter. His name resurfaced like a persistent shadow. Anger surged inside me, but I suppressed it. I needed more proof. I hired a private investigator, an old contact from the insurance company, to dig deeper. 2 weeks later, he sent me a brief but devastating report. The trust fund, worth $3 million, set up for me, had been emptied just 3 months after my grandfather's death. Transactions went through James Carter, bearing my father's and Luke's signatures. I sat in the old house, the investigator's report on the table beside my grandfather's letter. I felt betrayed, not just by my family, but by my own trust in them. I had tried to love them, tried to forgive their distance, but now I knew they hadn't just abandoned me. I think they had stolen what my grandfather left for me, what he had spent his life safeguarding. I clutched the letter, tears blurring the words. "Grandpa," I whispered, "I'm sorry. I let them take what was mine." But then I wiped my tears, stood up and looked at his photo. I knew what I had to do. I would confront them. I would reclaim what was mine, no matter the price. My grandfather's letter, the investigator's report, and the scattered fragments of truth lay before me like a call to action. I could no longer exist in the faint shadow of my family. I couldn't allow them to believe they could steal my grandfather's legacy without repercussions. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and booked a flight to Miami. The sheer thought of facing my parents and Luke made my heart race. I've never been one to argue. I always opted for silence, for compromise, to maintain peace. But this time was different. This wasn't just about money, $3 million or any other sum. It was about trust, about what my grandfather had dedicated his life to preserving for me. About a betrayal I never thought my family was capable of. I prepared meticulously. I printed the investigator's report, duplicated the bank transactions, and placed my grandfather's letter into a new envelope, treating it like a good luck charm. I didn't know how this confrontation would play out, but I knew I couldn't back down. I packed a few clothes, took one last look around the old house, and whispered to my grandfather's photo, "I'll make you proud." The flight to Miami was long and uncomfortable. I sat by the window, watching clouds drift by, my mind a jumble of thoughts. I envisioned every possible scenario, my parents apologizing, Luke feeling ashamed, or all of them simply denying everything. But deep down, I knew this meeting wouldn't be easy. They had been living in luxury for 5 years, and to them, I was just an outsider, not worth their time. When the plane landed, Miami's harsh sunlight hit my face. I rented a cheap car and drove directly to my parents' mansion, an address I only knew from their social media posts. As I pulled up to the gate, I could barely believe my eyes. The house was enormous, pristine white, with Roman-style columns and a sparkling pool out back. Tall palm trees lined the driveway, and a red sports car, undoubtedly Luke's, was parked in front of the garage. This wasn't the home of the family I remembered, the ones who once lived in the creaky wooden house in Sacramento. This was a different universe, one I didn't belong to. I took a deep breath, clutching the folder of documents, and pressed the doorbell. A maid opened the gate, studying me curiously. "I'm Jacob Blake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm here to see my parents, Martin and Janet Blake." She led me inside. The living room was massive, with soaring ceilings and abstract paintings on the walls. A faint scent of expensive perfume hung in the air. I heard laughter from the back near the pool. The maid asked me to wait and went to get my parents. I stood there, feeling like a complete stranger in my own family's house. My mother appeared first, wearing a white silk dress, her hair styled up, her smile as brilliant as in her photos. But when she saw me, that smile wavered. "Jacob," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "What are you doing here? Why didn't you call?" "I need to talk," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Due to you, Dad and Luke. It's important." My father walked in, still radiating that polished air in a gray suit. Luke followed, wearing a designer t-shirt, glaring at me as if I'd just ruined his party. "What's so urgent, buddy?" Luke asked, his tone half mocking, half teasing. I didn't answer right away. I led them to the living room and placed the folder on the glass table in front of us. "I know about the trust fund," I said, looking directly into my father's eyes. "The one Grandpa left for me. $3 million, and I know it was emptied and transferred to accounts under your and Luke's names." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. My mother glanced at my father, then at Luke, a flicker of panic in her eyes. My father let out a loud laugh, but it couldn't mask his tension. "What are you talking about, Jacob? A trust fund? Are you hallucinating?" I pulled out my grandfather's letter and placed it on the table. Grandpa wrote this before he died. Clearly stated there was a trust fund for me and that I should see James Carter to claim it. Carter said no such thing existed, and I found evidence. Bank transactions, your signatures. Luke's too. They all show the money was taken. Luke chuckled, but his voice wavered. "You're insane, Jacob. You think we need your money? Look around." He gestured at the opulent room. "We're doing 100 times better than you are. And why did you all suddenly get rich right after Grandpa died?" I asked, my voice colder than I had anticipated. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Was I left behind while you all live it up here?" My mother stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder, her voice soft but disingenuous. "Jacob, you've misunderstood. You only want what's best for you. You like your simple life, so we left you in Sacramento. As for the money, that's from your father's successful business. Stop lying." I cut her off, my anger flaring. "I have proof. The transactions, the signatures, even confirmation from the bank. I just want the truth. Why did you take what was mine?" My father stood, his face flushed. "You dare accuse me of stealing, Jacob, to a lowly clerk, standing here accusing me." His voice boomed, overpowering the Christmas music playing from the outdoor speakers. "I'm not accusing," I said, fighting to stay calm. "I just want the truth. There's nothing wrong. Why does all the evidence suggest Grandpa left me a trust fund, and you brazenly took it?" Luke stepped forward, pointing at my face. "You'd never know how to manage money, Jacob. You'd squander it in a week. We deserve it more than you. Look at you living like a pauper in that old house. You think Grandpa wanted you to have that money?" Luke's words cut deep. I looked at him, my little brother, the one I used to play with in the backyard, the one who cried when he fell off his bike, and I helped him home. Now he stood there mocking me as if I didn't belong in their world. I turned to my mother, hoping she'd say something, anything, to alleviate the pain. But she just looked down, silent. "I want you to return what's mine," I said, my voice trembling with anger and hurt. "If you don't, I'll take this to court." My father laughed, but his eyes were like ice. "You'd sue your own family? You'll regret this, Jacob. If you make this public, we'll disown you. You'll lose everything, not just the money, but your family." I looked at them, my father, my mother, Luke, the three people I once loved more than anyone. But now I saw only strangers. "I lost my family a long time ago," I said, my voice low, my stance firm. "You abandoned me when Grandpa died, not afraid of losing more." I turned and walked out of the mansion, not looking back. My father shouted something behind me, but I couldn't clearly hear it. I got in the car and drove off into Miami's dazzling sunlight, feeling as if a weight had been lifted, yet my heart was shattered. I knew I was embarking on a path of no return. I would file a lawsuit, even if it meant severing ties with my family entirely. As the plane lifted off, heading back to Sacramento, I gazed out the window, watching the clouds vanish into the distance. I thought of my grandfather, his letter, and his promise that I would possess something truly my own. "I'll do it, Grandpa," I whispered. "I'll reclaim what you left for me." Those words burned like a small flame in my heart, keeping me grounded. Despite the lingering pain from the confrontation with my family, I'd said I wasn't afraid of losing them. I was preparing for a fight, not just to recover my grandfather's legacy, but to prove I wasn't the outcast they believed me to be. Back in the old Sacramento house, it felt like stepping into another world. No twinkling lights, no pool, no expensive artwork, just weathered wooden walls, creaky floors, and my grandfather's photo on the wall, a quiet companion. Sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started looking for a new lawyer. I couldn't trust James Carter, who had denied the trust fund's existence. I needed someone honest, experienced, and bold enough to take on my family, who now had the means to hire the most expensive attorneys. After hours of searching and phone calls, I connected with Nicole Appleton, a lawyer specializing in trust disputes. Her small office in downtown Sacramento wasn't flashy like Carter's. But when I called, her voice exuded confidence and sincerity. I briefly shared my story, and she agreed to meet me the next day. "Bring all the documents you have," she said. "If what you're saying is true, we have a very strong case." I arrived at Nicole's office the next morning, carrying my grandfather's letter, the investigator's report, and the bank transactions. Her office was small but neat, with shelves full of files and a law degree framed on the wall. Nicole, a woman in her 30s with neatly tied black hair, greeted me with a gentle smile. "Have a seat, Jacob," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Tell me everything from the beginning." I recounted it all. From my grandfather's letter, my meeting with James Carter, the discovery of the trust fund, to the confrontation with my family in Miami. I tried to keep my voice steady, but every time I mentioned my parents and Luke's betrayal, my throat tightened. Nicole listened intently, taking careful notes and nodding occasionally. When I showed her my grandfather's letter, she read each line, her brow furrowing. "This is strong evidence," she said, setting the letter down, "but we'll need more. The bank transactions show the money was moved, but to win the case, we need to prove that your father, brother, and James Carter intentionally violated their fiduciary duties. Are you ready for a long fight, Jacob?" I nodded, though a flicker of worry remained. "I don't have much money to pay for a lawyer," I admitted, "but I can't let them take what's mine. My grandfather trusted me, and I don't want to let him down." Nicole smiled, her eyes brightening. "Don't worry about the costs right now. If we win, your family will have to cover legal fees too. I believe in this case. Jacob will see it through to the end." Over the next week, Nicole and I began preparing the lawsuit. She helped me file a complaint against my father, Luke, and James Carter for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Each step in the process made my heart race. Never imagined I'd sue my own family. The thought of facing my parents and Luke in court made my chest tighten. But then I'd look at my grandfather's photo, and I knew I had no other choice. My family's reaction came quicker than I anticipated. One evening, as I ate dinner alone, in the old kitchen, my phone vibrated. It was my mother. I hesitated but answered. "Jacob," her voice trembled, a mix of anger and panic. "What are you doing? Suing your own family? You want to ruin our reputation?" I took a deep breath. "Mom, I just want what Grandpa left for me. If you and Dad did nothing wrong, why are you scared? You don't understand anything," she shouted. "You'll regret this. Jacob, you're tearing the family apart." I wanted to tell her they had torn the family apart long ago. that they had abandoned me during those lonely years. But I remained silent, listening to her lecture me for a few more minutes before she hung up. Soon after, I got a text from Luke. "You're such a traitor. Just wait. You'll lose everything." I turned off my phone, feeling both angry and empty. They offered no apologies, no remorse, only cared about their reputation and money. Less than a week later, I discovered my family wasn't stopping at threats. On social media, my mother posted a lengthy rant, calling me ungrateful and accusing me of slandering the family for personal gain. My father called aunts, uncles, and cousins, spreading a distorted story about how I was trying to destroy the family out of jealousy for their success. A few relatives texted me, urging me to drop the lawsuit to protect the family's reputation. "Jacob, what are you doing?" my Aunt Linda wrote. "Family comes first. Don't let money tear us apart." Reading those messages felt like being stabbed. Repeatedly, but I didn't respond. I knew if I backed down now, I'd live forever in the shadow of their betrayal. I called Nicole and told her what was happening. "They're trying to intimidate you," she said. "Don't let them win. We have evidence, and we'll fight to the end." Nicole worked relentlessly. She contacted the bank, secured additional transaction records, and even located a witness, a former employee of James Carter who had resigned shortly after the trust fund was emptied. The witness agreed to testify that Carter was aware of the trust and deliberately hid its existence. Nicole also unearthed a copy of the original trust agreement from the bank, unequivocally naming me as the sole beneficiary. These documents were like a beacon in the darkness, offering me hope that justice would prevail. But the battle was far from easy. My family hired an expensive team of Miami lawyers who started sending threatening letters, demanding I drop the lawsuit or face severe repercussions. They emailed Nicole, accusing me of fabrication and threatening a countersuit for defamation. Every day, I received messages from distant relatives and old family friends, all blaming me for tearing the family apart. I felt like the world was against me. But each time I looked at my grandfather's letter, I found the resolve to keep going. Nicole became my anchor during those days. She wasn't just my lawyer. She was a friend, reminding me I was doing the right thing. "You're not alone, Jacob," she said during one meeting. "Your grandfather believed in you, and so do I. We'll win. But you have to stay strong." I nodded, clutching the letter tightly. I knew this fight wasn't just about money. It was about safeguarding my grandfather's legacy, about proving I wasn't the failure my family believed me to be. I would fight until the very end, even if it broke my heart. When the first court hearing was scheduled for August, I felt like I was stepping into a whirlwind. I had never been in a courtroom, never faced the scrutinizing stares of a judge, a jury, or, most dauntingly, my own family. But every time I felt like giving up, I looked at my grandfather's letter, its slanted handwriting a reminder that I couldn't back down. The trial took place in a Sacramento courthouse in a large room with polished wooden walls and rigid rows of seats. I sat beside Nicole, my hands tightly clasped to calm my nerves. Across from us was my family's legal team, 3 men in expensive suits, their eyes sharp and smiles confident. My parents and Luke sat behind them, looking more unfamiliar than ever. My mother wore an emerald silk dress, her hair pinned up, but her eyes avoided mine. My father sat stiffly, his face cold as stone, while Luke smirked as if I were a joke to him. Nicole placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Breathe. Jacob, we're well prepared. They can't undo the truth." I nodded, but my heart pounded. As the judge, a stern, middle-aged woman with piercing eyes, entered the room. She struck her gavel, and the trial began. The next 3 months were a relentless battle. My family, supported by their expensive legal team, spared no effort to discredit me. They called me ungrateful, a jealous son, envious of his family's success. One of their lawyers, Richard Hayes, stood before the court and declared that I had fabricated the story of the trust fund for personal gain. "Jacob Blake is a failed man," he said, his voice smooth as an actor's. Unable to accept his family's success, he concocted a far-fetched tale about a trust fund to tear them down. Each word was like a knife, but I tried to stay calm. "Nicole had warned me they'd do this." "They have. No evidence to refute us," she said. Focus on the truth. And I did. I provided everything we had. My grandfather's letter, the investigator's report, the bank statements. Nicole presented each piece with clarity and unwavering precision. Called our first witness, Henry, the retired banker who had worked with my grandfather. Henry, his voice trembling with age, confirmed that my grandfather had set up a $3 million trust fund for me and that the money was withdrawn shortly after his death. But my parents' legal team didn't give up easily. They grilled Henry, trying to confuse him, suggesting he misremembered or was mistaken, even produced forged documents claiming the trust's funds had been legally transferred to my father before my grandfather's death. I looked at my father, hoping for a flicker of remorse, but he sat there, his gaze icy, as if I weren't his son. Meanwhile, the local media caught wind of the case. Few Sacramento newspapers ran stories about the $1 million family inheritance dispute. The sensational headlines like "Son sues parents over stolen trust fund." Some articles portrayed me as a pitiful figure, a son abandoned by his family. Others sided with my family, calling me an ungrateful child trying to ruin their reputation. Each time I read those stories, I felt torn apart. I didn't want to be the center of attention, but I knew I couldn't stop. Nicole kept me focused. "Don't read the papers," she said. "They're just chasing clicks. We have the truth, and that's what matters." She worked tirelessly, preparing for each hearing with astonishing meticulousness. In September, Nicole presented our pivotal evidence, a copy of the original trust agreement from the bank, signed by my grandfather, unequivocally naming me as the sole beneficiary. She also displayed bank statements, tracing the $3 million transfer to my father's and Luke's accounts, authorized by James Carter's signature. The most crucial witness was Emily, a former assistant of Carter's, who had resigned shortly after the trust was emptied. Emily stood before the court, her voice shaky but determined. "I saw Mr. Carter and Mr. Martin Blake sign the transfer documents," she testified. "I asked Mr. Carter if it was legal since the trust was clearly in Jacob Blake's name," he told me, to keep quiet, saying it was family business. The courtroom fell silent after Emily's testimony. I looked at my parents and Luke. My mother bowed her head, clutching a handkerchief. My father stared directly at the judge, but I saw his shoulders tremble. Luke, for the first time during the trial, lost his mocking smirk. His face paled as if he realized everything was collapsing. Judge Margaret Collins began questioning my family sharply. "Mr. Martin Blake," she said, her voice cutting, "how do you explain these transactions? If the money didn't come from the trust, where did it originate? Can you provide evidence of the legitimate source of the funds that purchased the mansion, the cars, and the lavish trips?" My father stood, his voice quivering but still attempting to sound confident. "Your Honor, it was from my business. I made successful real estate investments, and do you have documentation to prove that?" Judge Collins interrupted, her gaze piercing him. My father stammered, glancing at his lawyer, but Mr. Hayes only shook his head slightly. "We... We'll provide it later," my father said, his voice fading. The judge turned to Luke. "And you, Luke Blake? You purchased a sports car worth over $200,000 just months after your grandfather's death. How do you explain that?" Luke opened his mouth, but no words came out. His face was ashen, his eyes panicked. I looked at them, my parents and my brother, and felt a mix of pain and relief. They couldn't answer. They couldn't prove anything. The truth was finally emerging, and for the first time, I felt I was nearing justice. The trial continued into late October. Each day brought a new hurdle. My parents' legal team tried to shift the momentum with vague arguments and unreliable witnesses, but Nicole never faltered. She countered every point, presented every piece of evidence, and kept me grounded through the most stressful days. Some nights sleep eluded me as I lay in bed, wondering if I was doing the right thing. But then I'd think of my grandfather, his letter, and I knew I couldn't quit. At the final hearing, the courtroom felt oppressive, like a storm was brewing. Judge Collins looked at both sides, her eyes sharp but impartial. "I have reviewed all the evidence," she stated, "and I will deliver my ruling next month. But let me say this. This case isn't just about money. It's about trust, responsibility, and what one generation leaves for the next. I looked at my family. My mother was crying, but she still wouldn't meet my eyes. My father sat motionless, his gaze hollow. Luke bowed his head, his hands gripping the chair tightly. I didn't feel victorious. I only felt a profound sadness. But I knew I had done the right thing. I had safeguarded my grandfather's legacy, and that was what mattered most. When Judge Margaret Collins announced she'd deliver her ruling the following month, I left the courtroom with mixed feelings.
What?
Nicole patted my shoulder, assuring me we had done our best and that our evidence was undeniable. But deep down, victory wasn't what I yearned for anymore. I simply wanted justice. And above all, I wanted my grandfather to know I hadn't let him down. November arrived, bringing Sacramento the biting chill of winter. The final hearing took place on a foggy morning, with weak sunlight filtering through the courtroom's large windows. I sat beside Nicole, gripping my grandfather's letter like a protective charm. My family sat across from us, but they appeared different this time. My mother no longer wore her expensive silk dresses, just a plain sweater. My father sat with slumped shoulders, his eyes tired. Luke's arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by obvious tension on his face. Judge Collins entered, struck her gavel, and the courtroom fell silent. She looked around, her stern gaze resting on each of us. After thoroughly reviewing all evidence and testimony, she began, her voice resounding. This court finds that the $3 million trust fund established by William Blake rightfully belongs to its sole beneficiary, Jacob Blake. My heart felt like it stopped. Nicole squeezed my hand lightly, but I didn't dare look at her. I kept my eyes on the judge, trying to stay calm as she continued. Martin Blake, Janet Blake, and Luke Blake are ordered to repay the full $3 million, along with additional penalties for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Furthermore, James Carter, the attorney involved in the unauthorized transfer, will face an investigation and revocation of his law license. The courtroom was silent. I heard my mother sob, but I couldn't look at her. The judge's gavel struck, ending the trial. But to me, it was like a bell signaling the end of a chapter in my life. I stood, my legs trembling, and left the courtroom with Nicole. Outside, the freezing air made me shiver, but I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Victory didn't bring the joy I'd once imagined. Nicole hugged me, her smile bright. "You did it, Jacob," she said. "Your grandfather would be so proud." I nodded but said nothing. I knew she was right, but a heavy sadness lingered in my heart. I had reclaimed my grandfather's legacy, but at the cost of my family, the relationship I had once hoped, however faintly, to save. In the weeks that followed, I learned that my family had fallen into deep debt. The Miami mansion was foreclosed to cover their obligations. Luke's sports cars were auctioned off. The lavish trips, the extravagant parties, all were now just distant memories. My mother called me once, her voice trembling, begging for forgiveness. "Jacob, I didn't know things would go this far," she said. "I just wanted our family to have a better life." I listened, but didn't respond right away. I genuinely wanted to forgive her, but the wound was too deep. "Mom," I finally said, "I only wanted what Grandpa left for me. I didn't want to destroy the family, but you all chose this path." I hung up, tears falling silently. I didn't know if I could ever truly forgive, but for now, I just wanted to move forward. James Carter, as per the court's ruling, had his law license revoked. Local newspapers ran stories with headlines like, "Sacramento lawyer disbarred for trust fund fraud." Part of me felt satisfied that justice had been served, but a larger part felt empty. The money, the reputation, everything my family had chased after was gone. But I wasn't. I was still here in the old house, with my grandfather's memories and his promise. When the $3 million was transferred to my account, I didn't feel the excitement I'd once expected. I sat in the old kitchen, looking out at the overgrown garden, and thought about what my grandfather would want me to do. He had said, "Money doesn't define a person, but it could help me live true to myself." I decided not to pursue the glamour my family had chased. I didn't want a mansion, a fancy car, or extravagant trips. I wanted a simple, sustainable life. Just as my grandfather had taught me, I used part of the money to renovate the old house, replacing the roof, repainting the wooden walls, and turning the overgrown garden into a small vegetable patch. I invested the rest in a savings fund and a few modest projects like opening a woodworking shop in Sacramento where I could work with my hands, as my grandfather once did. I didn't need to be rich, I just needed enough to live authentically. One winter evening, as light snow fell outside the window, I stood in the living room, rehanging my grandfather's photo on the wall. The picture was old, but his eyes still shone with unwavering faith. I touched the frame, feeling a peace I hadn't known in years. "I protected your legacy, Grandpa," I whispered. I did it. I sat on the sofa, opened a bottle of inexpensive wine, the kind my grandfather liked, and poured a glass. I looked out the window where snowflakes glimmered under the streetlights. The old house still creaked, still carried the familiar scent of pine. I no longer had a family in the conventional sense, but I had my grandfather. Not in person, but in his lessons, his letter, and the legacy he left behind. And for me, that was enough. I took a sip of wine, the slight bitterness lingering on my tongue. I thought about the lonely years, the times I was abandoned, the legal battle I'd just endured. It had all led me to this moment, a quiet, unflashy, but complete moment. I didn't need anyone's validation. I didn't need glamorous social media, photos. I just needed to know I had lived up to what my grandfather believed in. Outside, the world kept turning. The press would eventually forget the lawsuit. My family would find ways to rebuild their lives. But I would stay here in the old house, living a simple, honest life. Every time I looked at my grandfather's photo, I knew he was smiling.